Inside Carrius's mindscape, the Imperial Palace, Opara Taldor, winter 4718. The journey through the mind of Prince Carrius had proven a strange one, and taken the party deep into the realm of Taldor's imperial legacy, where the echoes of its greatest emperors were preserved, each one a symbol of strength, leadership, and the ruthless ambitions that had shaped the empire. Prince Carrius's soul had been poisoned by the wizard Penavar Lothide, and he had hidden his corruption behind a protective spiritual seal called the Six-Legend Soul. But the seal was weakening, as the party had already convinced Emperor Taldaris' spirit to leave the soul of Carrius, convinced Emperor Syracuse' spirit that this was not the daring adventure he was searching for, and finally by winning the loyalty of the Ulfin Guard of Emperor Darenlir, who was known for his manipulative cunning and skilled oratory. 3 legends remained: Beldam I, Genaris III, and Stavian I. Aurelius, Diyanah, Demi, Marius, and Rankle would try the Whispering Door, leading to the legend of Beldam I next. The legend of Emperor Beldam I. The Whispering Door creaked open, and the party stepped into a dimly lit chamber. A grand council hall, its polished wooden halls lined with marble busts of long-forgotten senators and noblemen. Their sculpted faces seemed to shift in the flickering light, their stone lips murmuring secrets too faint to decipher. Shadows pooled in the corners of the room, giving it the feeling of eternal dusk, where whispers of the past never truly faded. At the chamber's center stood a long, polished wooden table, its surface gleaming in the candlelight. 6 silver cups sat neatly arranged in front of a heavy-set man with pale skin, dark curly hair, and a furrowed brow. He wore the elaborate yet slightly disheveled robes of a Taldan emperor, his fingers splayed on the table, his eyes darting nervously between the cups. As the heroes approached, the man muttered to himself, his voice tinged with unease and regret. "Good wine rarely makes for good prudence, but I genuinely believed I'd found the exception. Oh, bother. I'd really rather not poison his wife." Demi had explained to the others what she knew of Emperor Beldam I from history, an emperor known for his political cunning, who navigated the treacherous intrigues of court life with a mix of manipulation, paranoia, and occasional good humor. Unlike the warriors they had faced before, Beldam I was no conqueror. He was a man who ruled with words, alliances, and poisons, as often as with armies. Beldam's dark eyes lifted towards the group. He sighed heavily. "You are not my courtiers, and you are not here to drink, I presume. Then tell me, strangers, what would you do if the cup before you held both salvation and damnation?" Demi took the lead here. "You're telling us that you poisoned one of these 6 cups, and now you cannot recall where you have placed the poison. Is that correct?" Beldam squinted his eyes. "Yes, more or less. Although now you say it, I recall I placed the poison in a cup that was next to either a silver or a platinum cup." Aurelius groaned, understanding implicitly what was happening here. "Come on, Emperor Beldam, help us to help you. Surely you remember more than one clue." Beldam looked indignant, but he remarked, Okay, here's something else I remember. If the sigil in the poisoned cup does not have scales, then it has hooves." The party examined the cups in sequence. A golden cup with a scallop carving, decorated with brilliant rubies. A silver cup with a dragon carving, decorated with many emeralds. A golden cup with a hippogriff carving, decorated with pink pearls. A copper cup with an eagle carving, and no gems at all. A silver cup with a unicorn carving, decorated with pink diamonds, and a platinum cup with a naga carving, decorated with expensive jade. Rankle sniffed at the cups to see if he could glean anything from their smell. "No tricks here to ensure you didn't poison yourself by mistake, by any chance?" "Oh yes," said Beldam with pride. "Of course, I didn't poison the cup with a naga on it. Too obvious." Marius sighed, trying his own hand at diplomacy with the Emperor. "Come on, Emperor, really think about it. I'm sure there's something else you're not remembering." "Yes, indeed I did. A riddle I told myself. But it was a bit complicated. How did it go now? Oh yes, if the poison cup has feathers, then it is exactly 2 cups to the right of a golden cup." "Okay, that's the clue we needed. I figured it out," said Aurelius, snapping his fingers. "The poison is in the hippogriff cup." No sooner were these words out of his mouth, and the mists and shadows of the room began to swirl. Their bodies felt like they were lurching unnaturally. A moment later they found themselves seated around the long dark table, dressed in fashions and jewels centuries out of date. A goblet sat before each of them, and at the head of the table Beldam lifted his own. "To Taldor! Long may she know peace!" Beldam was drinking from the goblet with a naga on it. Aurelius found himself drinking from the scalloped goblet, Demi from the Dragon one, Marius from the Eagle one, and Rankle from the Unicorn one. Diyanah, much to his horror, found himself drinking from the poisoned hippogriff cup. As he drank it down, the room dissipated, and the party found itself back in the circular chamber with the doors and the chains. Diyanah felt a tremendous pain in his stomach. The poison would be lethal if the wrong person drank it. Thankfully, Diyanah's powerful mystic chi force could be used to neutralize any poison he ingested, and after a moment spent meditating, his mastery of mind over body allowed him to still the poison inside him. "What the heck just happened?" asked Diyanah. "I think we just failed the challenge somehow," noted Aurelius. "But the whisper door is still standing, so maybe we can try again." They stepped through the door, and the room appeared to have reset itself. The party found themselves back at the beginning, standing in the Whispering Council chamber, the busts murmuring indistinctly, their whispers fading and then rising again, like an audience watching a play that they had seen 100 times before. At the head of the table, Emperor Beldam I sat once more, his hands splayed before him, his brow furrowed. "Good wine rarely makes for good prudence, but I genuinely believed I'd found the exception. Oh, bother. I'd really rather not poison his wife." As if the last attempt had never happened. The party exchanged glances. They were trapped in a loop, doomed to repeat the trial until they succeeded, or found another way out. Demi exhaled through her nose, brushing her blonde hair back. "All right," she murmured to the others. "If we can't win this game the normal way, let's cheat." As before, Beldam began listing his clues, speaking with a mix of frustration and theatricality. While he spoke, this time Diyanah whistled sharply to distract Beldam. He snapped his fingers to signal Raja. The lion reared up on his hind legs and began balancing on a single paw, performing an intricate series of movements, almost like a circus act. "Oh my!" Beldam blinked, his gaze snapping to the giant lion twirling in place. "I say, that is rather impressive." That was Demi's cue. With the Emperor distracted, the bard subtly reached out, pouring the poison from the hippogriff cup into an old empty potion bottle from her belt, transferring the clean wine from the scalloped cup into the hippogriff cup, and finally pouring the poison into the naga cup that Beldam had drunk from the last time. Her movements were precise, quick, and practiced, ensuring the poison cup was no longer where Beldam believed it to be. But Beldam's eyes flicked back just a second too soon. His expression darkened. "What do you think you're doing?" "Nothing," said Demi innocently. "Just realizing that it is indeed the hippogriff cup that is poisoned." No sooner did she say this, and the light went out, and the room lurched once again. When their vision refocused, they were once more seated at the table, dressed in antiquated noble finery. The goblets before them were filled and waiting. Beldam raised his cup. "To Taldor!" But he was not holding the Naga cup this time. Instead, he was holding the scalloped cup. And much to her dismay, this time Demi found herself drinking from the poisoned cup. The moment the liquid touched her lips, the world collapsed once more, and they were yanked back into the circular chamber with the doors and chains. Demi gasped, clutching her throat, as a wave of burning pain flooded her system. Her android physiology resisted poison more than most, but this was not a normal poison. It was a curse woven into Beldam's legend itself. Nevertheless, her nanites flared up as they attempted to prevent the worst of the damage, and eventually, after a rather throaty series of coughs, Demi had recovered. Aurelius cursed under his breath. "All right, so cheating doesn't work either." Marius nodded. "Or he's just paying attention and he saw what Demi did. He said the poison was intended for Lord Carthus, right? I have one last idea to try." Demi clenched her fists, steadying herself with sheer willpower. "Fine," she gritted out. "Let's try this one more time." A moment later they were back in the room. "Good wine rarely makes for good prudence, but I genuinely believed I'd found the exception. Oh, bother. I'd really rather not poison his wife," said Beldam in the same tone and tenor as before. Marius then rushed over to Beldam urgently. "My lord, I have some terrible and urgent news." "What is it?" said Emperor Beldam, immediately believing the urgency in Marius's voice. "I'm afraid agents of House Carthus are onto you, my lord," he said with great concern. "They know you put the poison in the hippogriff cup, and so I know they've moved it to one of the other goblets." Beldam's eyes widened with alarm. "Which one, do you think?" "Unfortunately, we can't be sure," said Marius. "Any of the other cups may be poisoned. In fact, the only cup we can be certain about isn't poisoned is the hippogriff one now." "Very well," said Beldam wickedly, and as the room lurched beneath him, Marius sincerely hoped he didn't wind up with a hippogriff cup himself. Mercifully, Beldam had believed the lie, and this time the hippogriff cup sat before him. The Emperor drank deeply of the poisoned cup, and with a terrible cry he died then and there. The whisper door shattered, and another chain broke away from the throne. only 2 chains remained. The legend of Emperor Jannaris III. Beyond the sword door stretched an enormous outdoor battlefield, reaching across a rocky plain. Aurelius immediately identified the battlefield as the Plains of Paresh in western Katheer. It was a grotesque sight. Screams and cries of pain echoed across the miserable battlefield as buzzing flies and the stench of rotting flesh choked the air. Bodies lay piled in heaps in the blood-soaked ground, some still reaching out to beg for care or a swift death. Hands twitched and eyes blinked in charnel piles. Against the sky, an armored figure stood tall among the dead, surrounded by 6 immense gore-covered scimitars that had been driven into the soil. This was the territory of Emperor Jannaris III, the Conqueror, remembered as one of Taldor's greatest military leaders. Jannaris' legend appeared to have manifested as a spirit of slaughter. Although remembered as a great war hero, his was the unwavering belief that war was necessary to protect the nation's freedom. As soon as the 5 heroes came into view, he addressed them. "Taldor is a nation that stands, O fools, by the strength of a blade. Such was true for Taldaris as it was for me, and your hands are far from clean. But death's greatest failing is that it can stop but a single soldier, never an army." And as he said these words, the bodies of the dead and dying began to writhe towards him, gathering together into a misshapen serpentine form that merged with his torso. The 6 giant scimitars that had appeared to be driven into the ground around him erupted from the ground, each a fearsome giant flying blade striking out of its own accord. Demi recalled that Jannaris was famous for killing 6 Katheeran generals in single combat. He had kept each one's sword as a trophy of his prowess. These weapons, then, were echoes of those famous kills. Marius leapt forward, his fists slamming into Jannaris' monstrous form, but some powerful protective magical shield appeared to block each of his attacks. As he pounded his gauntleted fist against the shield, he watched, observing how the crackle of energy seemed to run around the monster and towards the swords. "I think the swords are protecting him somehow," called out the Brawler. The heroes adjusted their strategy, shifting focus to the cursed weapons. Yet they proved as formidable as their original wielders, slashing, parrying, and resisting every attempt to shatter them. The battle turned desperate as Aurelius' conjured phantom flames had no effect on the swords, while Diyanah's strikes, though powerful, barely chipped their enchanted edges. Then Demi, sensing the tide turning against them, took a desperate gambit. She drew a single breath and flew forward into the middle of her enemies and unleashed her magic, a bardic spell of chilling resonance, the frozen note. A bright white nova of cold expanded outwards from her as an unnatural frost spread all around, ice creeping over Jannaris' monstrous form and his spectral blades alike. The swords faltered, their movement slowing as frost crackled along their surfaces. Jannaris himself let out a guttural roar, struggling against the encroaching cold. Seizing the moment, Marius and Rankle struck in unison. One by one, the brittle swords shattered beneath their blows, each explosion of ice and steel breaking the spirit of the ancient warlord. As the last of the swords shattered, Diyanah and Raja leapt onto Jannaris himself, flaming fist and raking claw unraveling his body until it broke apart into a storm of ash and memory. The battlefield seemed to dissolve around them, and the heroes found themselves once more in the circular chamber of chains and doors. The sword emblazoned door had vanished, another legend had fallen, only one remained. The legend of Stavian I. They emerged from the fire door into a city of fire. Flames leapt from the crumbling rooftops, casting long shadows through the ruins of once proud buildings. Ash and embers drifted like falling stars in the suffocating heat, while iron cages dangled from charred posts, each containing the writhing blackened skeleton of a victim consumed by fire. Their jaws worked in silent screams, and now and then a piercing wail, thin and sharp like a kettle's hiss, rose above the constant crackling of the inferno. This was the domain of Emperor Stavian I, the man who had purged Taldor of Sarenrae's faithful, convinced they were traitors who aided Katheera's armies. Though history had recorded him as a pious ruler who rooted out heresy for the good of the nation, his methods had been merciless. The pogroms he led against the Dawnflower's worshippers swept up both spies and innocents alike, and those who did not perish in the flames were subjected to torture to extract confessions of treason. Entire communities burned under his decree, a cleansing fire meant to purify Taldor of perceived disloyalty. And despite the suffering he inflicted, Stavian I's legend believed he had been right. To him, unity was paramount. Only a nation bound by a single faith and purpose could remain strong. Any who opposed such unity were threats to be eliminated. Through the smoke and shifting embers his figure emerged, larger than life, sculpted from living fire. His features were sharp and regal, the face of a noble Taldan emperor in his prime, untouched by doubt or regret. He regarded the intruders with a gaze of molten gold, his voice smooth and measured, yet carrying the weight of judgment. "All I have done I did to protect Taldo. Could they not see how weak our nation had become? The cult of the Dawnflower would have broken us in two." Then, hearing the noise of the party approaching, he looked up. "What's this?" he asked suddenly. The party caught sight of the Emperor holding a torch, ready to set alight a pile of bodies. Aurelius was ready with a haste spell, and with the aid of the magic, Marius streaked across the terrain and pulled the torch out of the Emperor's hand. The Emperor seemed disgusted that he had been so manhandled. Then, taking a good look at the half-orc stood before him, he gripped the holy symbol of Aradin that swung at his chest. "And lo," he said, quoting some long-forgotten lines of scripture, "Aradin did spake with Taldaris, and say unto him, Thou shalt forge a mighty empire, and it shall be a great testament to the profound and enduring greatness of humanity." He seemed to nearly spit this last word into Marius's face. Marius grimaced and cracked his knuckles. "So you're one of those guys." Rankle, Diyanah, and Raja were soon at his side, with Demi and Aurelius providing covering fire from the rear. Emperor Stavian I, however, was not alone for long either. Focusing on the holy symbol at his neck, he appeared to summon two powerful Tabelia angels to his side, each with white-feathered wings carrying large golden hammers. The moment the Tabelia angels materialized, the battlefield ignited with divine fury. Their radiant wings unfurled, scattering embers as they lifted their golden warhammers, each weapon glowing with celestial power. Emperor Stavian stood between them, his form still wreathed in fire, watching the intruders with a mixture of disdain and righteous fury. Marius barely had time to register the angels before one descended upon him, hammer swinging in a deadly arc. He barely raised his shield in time, and even then the sheer force of the strike sent him skidding backwards through the ash. The second angel turned his attention to Rankle, who had already vanished into the swirling smoke, only to reappear behind the celestial being with both scimitars drawn. A flare of steel rang out as he struck, but the angel twisted with unnatural speed, intercepting the attack with its hammer. Diyanah and Raja charged together, the dire lion's cry cutting through the roar of flames. Raja pounced, claws raking across the Emperor's burning form, but Stavian merely laughed, the flames around him thickening into a protective barrier. With a gesture he unleashed a wave of fire, forcing the monk and the beast to spring backwards. From the back line, Aurelius and Demi began their assault. Aurelius cast a powerful disintegration spell that at first seemed like it would fail to pierce the Emperor's spell resistance, but he had since learned to bounce his spells if they looked like they would fail to affect a given target. With a practiced flick of his hand, he switched targets, blasting one of the angels with the full force of the disintegration spell. It struck the angel with such strength it almost destroyed it outright. Demi finished the job, cutting down that angel in a hail of bolts. "Kill stealer," cried Rankle as the angel before him succumbed to the attack. He was only joking. In fact, he was considering that for this fight he had some magic of his own that might prove more effective than his blades. He glanced over at Marius to see that the half-orc had recovered from his own angel's staggering blow and had launched himself back into the fray, his brawler instincts taking over. Then suddenly the angel stopped fighting with Marius. Rankle had landed a command-summoned creature spell on the angel, and he was now redirecting it towards Stavian. The burning emperor was completely surrounded now, with enemies on all sides, but it seemed that with every passing moment Stavian's strength and fury only grew with every strike that the party landed, his body pulsing with divine fire as he prepared to unleash something catastrophic. It was finally Raja succeeding on grappling the emperor in his great jaws and shaking him like a rag doll before throwing him to the ground that broke the emperor's steely defense. Diyanah and Marius and the great hammer of the commandeered angel all struck at once at the prone emperor. With a howl of defeat, Stavian's divine form fractured into shards of light, and with a final furious scream, Emperor Stavian I's legend was consumed in his own inferno, vanishing into embers. As the battlefield began to dissolve around them, fading back into the mindscape's central chamber, Demi exhaled sharply, lowering her crossbow. "Well," she muttered, "that was intense." Rankle dusted off his singed robes. "I hate zealots." Aurelius nodded to the group. That was the last one. But look. The last chain slipped off the throne, and as it did so, across from the throne, a seventh and final door appeared in the central chamber. This appeared to be marked with a crow, lying on its back, its little bird legs kicked up into the air, as if it had died. A child's bedroom in Carrius's mindscape. When the party opened the door, they could hear the sound of rolling thunder echoing through a boy's bedroom, where the curtains had been tied back on a large window. Beyond the window, lightning crashed, and rain pattered against the glass as a storm raged outside, casting flickering shadows across the small, dimly lit room. In the centre, a brooding child sat, dressed in a young lord's wig, his expression dark with sorrow. In his hands he cradled a dead raven. "Zeno here was sitting too close to the window when the lightning struck," the boy said pitifully, his voice thick with grief. "It's not fair. Why did my birdie have to die? Why does everything have to die?" Then a great anger filled him, and the very air in the room turned electric with his emotion. His small hands clenched around the lifeless bird as a surge of unnatural energy crackled through the space. They looked at the young boy carrying the dead bird, and they all realized that this was a young Panevar Lothide, holding the very thing that had inspired him to sculpt all those ravens he was famous for, Aurelius's own raven familiar included. "I won't die," declared the boy suddenly, his voice rising with defiant determination. "Not me, not ever, and all my friends will be immortal too. I'll remake Zeno, better, stronger, indestructible." Outside the window, the sound of massive wings beating against the storm, something vast and unnatural stirring in the darkness. "A relative of yours?" said Diyanah to Aurelius's raven familiar. It said nothing, but cocked its head slightly awkwardly at the monk. Then, with a crash, the whole wall seemed to come apart as a colossal raven the size of a titan was there, lightning running along its great feathered wings and cascading towards them. "Kill them all, Zeno!" instructed the boy. It was the last thing this incarnation of Panevar would say, before Marius delivered another one of his signature knockout punches, knocking the kid clean unconscious. The air crackled with raw power as the massive lightning-forged raven unfurled its wings, sending arcs of electricity lashing through the ruined walls of the child's bedroom. Rain and wind howled through the shattered opening where the wall had once stood, whipping around the heroes as they hovered in mid-air, their flight magic keeping them aloft. Zeno, if it could even be called that anymore, loomed above them like a living storm. Its eyes blazed with unnatural light, and when it opened its beak, a piercing shriek tore through the sky, splitting the very air with a shock wave of sound and force. The first wave of lightning struck like a vengeful god's wrath, jagged bolts of white-hot energy cascading towards them. Aurelius reacted instantly, weaving a spell to disperse the worst of the storm's wrath, shielding himself and Demi from the brunt of it. Diyanah, Raja, and Rankle all had superior reflexes and foresight for evasion. They avoided the lightning with ease. Only Marius took the brunt of the blow, dropping to one knee in the bedroom after experiencing an avalanche of electrical power run through him. Diyanah, faster than thought, wove through the attack, streaking across the air towards the monstrous bird. Raja let out a deep rumbling growl before leaping into the sky, claws extended, dire collar active, his body shifting into its full battle form mid-air. Demi's battle song cut through the chaos, the power of her magic making each punch and claw count against the giant mindscape phantom. Marius was soon recovered as well, close behind Diyanah and Raja, wielding Coriana's blade with brutal precision. The three of them dodged between swipes of Zeno's electrified talons, delivering well-placed strikes wherever they could find an opening. The massive raven screeched in fury, its colossal wings sweeping outwards, creating a sudden burst of hurricane-force winds that sent them all spiraling back. But Rankle had been waiting. The Aindalar Oracle had slipped into the storm's shadows, using the cover of darkness to maneuver into perfect position. As Zeno reared back, Rankle shot forward, both scimitars flashing. With a sharp twist of his blades, he sliced through the storm-wrought energy, binding the raven's form together, disrupting its integrity. Zeno shrieked again, its form flickering, growing increasingly unstable as the magic binding it together had weakened. Aurelius, seizing the moment, extended a hand and uttered a final incantation. A phantasmal killer spell. A shadowy phantom appeared before the giant bird, an outstretched hand touching it on the beak. Its heart seized. It stopped beating, and abruptly the bird plummeted into the dark void that extended beyond the window of Panevar's childhood bedroom. The party withdrew to the unconscious form of Panevar Lothide. "What do we do with him?" asked Marius the others. "I didn't expect him to be just a kid." Rankle was their resident expert in spiritual matters. "Quintessence tends to seek to be reunited with itself," he explained. "That sliver of Taldaris we released will make its way to the Eternal City in Axis, and eventually rejoin with the rest of the Taldaris that you met in Syashto. The same will happen here, if we kill this small form Panevar left here in the Mindscape. And it would try to reach the rest of Panevar, which is currently locked in the Dead Vault." "Theoretically, yes," said Rankle. "There's another alternative, though. I can send this spirit to the Boneyard. I know how to get it to move on. Then it will be judged, independently of the rest of the soul. What would that mean? Asked Aurelius. I think it would mean we would at least partly appease Pharasma, said Rankle, since you all denied her the rest of Panavar's spirit when you consigned him to the Dead Vault. It suddenly occurred to the party that they had never known how Rankle had felt about that particular choice of theirs. Aurelius didn't inquire, though. He just asked about the mechanics at play here. No, I mean, literally, what would that mean for this spirit? What happens when a partial spirit is judged? Rankle nodded that he understood. It's more common than you think. All of the outer planes contain some version of lesser unbound quintessence. You remember the Arbiters in Axis? In Hell they're called Imps. In Heaven they're called Lantern Archons. This spirit would be transformed into some lesser post-mortal form. I don't know why, but that seems like the right thing to do, observed Marius. Right, there's also one last crazy option, said Aurelius. I could also move the spirit of Panavar into my own Raven familiar and keep him around as a kind of arcane advisor. Everyone looked at Aurelius with a start. Are you crazy? Asked Demi incredulously. Yeah, seriously, said Diyanah. Don't go all evil wizard on me in your later years. No, you guys are right, said Aurelius hastily. I was just vocalizing idle thoughts. Rankle, go ahead and do your thing. Rankle turned the boy over on his back and closed his eyes. I consign this spirit to the River of Souls and the care of the psychopomps. Go forth to the boneyard and be judged. As he said these words, the boy faded into an ethereal mist and dissipated. They were done. Aurelius activated the old wizard's signet ring, and the party was ejected from the mindscape. They were back in the Imperial Palace then, and in the bed before them Prince Carrius was suddenly awake, his bright eyes wide and clear. While his frame seemed fragile and his face was lined with fatigue, Carrius's expression was peaceful. They are gone, he said with much relief. The only one inside is me now. Then he turned sharply to the monk. Diyanah, you of all people, I can't believe you saved me. It would have been so much easier just to kill me and be done with it. Then a look of panic distorted his face, and all of a sudden he asked, Is she dead? Is my sister really dead? Of course not, said Diyanah. Haven't you met us yet? We totally saved her. And then Carrius was suddenly sobbing in Diyanah's arms. Okay, said the monk. Someone take the weepy kid away from me. As Demi wiped the tears from Carrius's face, the other three couldn't help but laugh at Diyanah. They all felt the same thing at the same time. They had done it. They had saved Taldor. An epilogue for the nation of Taldor. Carrius and Eutropia were soon reunited, and at long last on the following day a formal coronation took place. Thanks to their adventures in Zamar, the party had recovered the Primogen crown, and in a grand ceremony at the Imperial Palace, Baron Ottar Vinmark placed the crown upon Eutropia's head. The Ulfen Guard once again reswore their loyalty to the Grand Princess, even mighty Vor, who had been promptly unpetrified once they'd had a chance to explain themselves to the rest of the Guard. The following decade would bring significant changes to Taldor. It is said that what makes a sovereign is far more than their bloodline, their goals, or their best wishes. A sovereign is as much their road to power as what they intend to do with that power. Every action taken, every compromise, every new agenda either magnifies or obscures the guiding light that set them on that path to glory. While Eutropia began her long journey to the throne 20 years ago, with simple and kind-hearted intentions, born of the realization that no one should feel the sting of losing a loved one too early, she learned to rely on the trust and resolve of 5 specific but unlikely companions. And naturally, over the course of their adventures, Eutropia learned a good deal from the heroes of the War for the Crown. Because they forged an alliance with the Night Swan of Murat, because they fought and slew Yander Mercondus and his crew, because they struck a deal with Zan, and by swiftly executing their enemy, Maxillar Pytherius, Eutropia learned the value of efficiency. By winning influence with a Pathfinder society, by capturing rather than killing Bartleby Lothede, by forging an alliance with Count O'Cara, by putting Lucinia Mag and the other Murat criminals to work as punishment for their crimes, and by both accepting the Leng Ruby and then making a good deal of money selling the dangerous artifact, the party also taught Eutropia the value of practicality. However, the virtue they most embraced was that of compassion, and this ultimately rubbed off on Eutropia the most. The heroes had befriended Melfine Trant, despite having had a run-in with her during the Exaltation Day Gala. They had rescued the senators and the Senate sublevels. They had spent over 25,000 gold pieces on the renovation of Stakis. They exonerated and befriended Anlel Oakleaf. They had done so with Galindra Jonrek as well. They had reversed the petrification of the Medusa's victims. They found and rescued Cathan Zalar from prison. They brought peace to the murdered spirit of Tay Amelon. Finally they chose not to kill neither the Crown-Top Coup nor the Dragon Uyat, nor even the Duchess of Blood, Nenarina Della. Time and time again, when presented with an option to kill an enemy or give them a chance to redeem themselves, the heroes had chosen the latter, and this left a marked impression on the Grand Princess. After her ascent to the throne, Eutropia would come to be known as Eutropia the Kind. This was because kind words and extended hands had proved more effective than drawn blades in winning Eutropia the throne, and she honoured this simple truth through outreach and empathy for her subjects. Eutropia the Kind would take from those who had much to give, the nobles, the merchants, and the coin generated by Taldor's many trade routes, and invested it in the common good, to provide education, medicine, and a higher standard of living to all Taldans. To ensure that the needs of the common citizens were met, she borrowed from the Andoran philosophies, and introduced a publicly elected counterpart to the Senate to advise on government policy. While her reforms made Eutropia the Kind wildly popular with common citizens, her heavy taxes and flouting of many Taldan traditions angered many among the nobility. Her reign, therefore, would also lead to a resurgence in aristocratic conspiracies and secret societies dedicated to usurping the throne from her. Fortunately, she had powerful allies to help keep her protected. Rankle's Epilogue. After the coronation of Grand Princess Eutropia, Rankle made his way back to Keonin, and back into the service of Queen Talandia. In his new role as advisor to the Queen on Darklands matters, he became heavily entangled in a number of future events, including the elven response to the return of the Whispering Tyrant, and of course the looming threat of the demon Tree Raiser in Keonin's dreaded swampland of the Tanglebriar. Marius's Epilogue. After Eutropia was crowned, Marius went to visit with Lucrezia Marthane to return the subtle mask to the fey Swan Maid of Marat. He no longer felt it was appropriate to be its custodian, as Marius was retiring from the adventurer's life. It was high time he focused on a quiet life as a tavern keep. Although, with his newfound fame, Marius was certainly thinking of the possibility of franchising Abadar's Key, and that would of course mean travelling around the world to establish new locations from time to time. Lucrezia, as she had once told him she would, travelled to Galt to find a country more ready for the kind of sweeping change that she had imagined for Taldor. Some years later, however, disillusioned with her experiences in Galt, Lucrezia would find her way back to Marius. She now helps him run the main Abadar's Key tavern in the Eastport docks of Opara. Demi's Epilogue. Shortly after Eutropia's formal coronation, Demi went to spend some time back with the Falsebar family in North Tandak Prefecture, but it was only a few weeks. As she had said, she was no longer going to remain in their service. She had adventures of her own to have. Furthermore, ever since she had told Lady Hestia Themis of the contributions she had made to Aslanti knowledge through her work 70 years ago, Hestia had submitted for a field commission on Demi's behalf. So it was with some surprise that a letter arrived, addressed for Demi, informing her that she had been granted membership to the Pathfinder Society. One thing led to another, and since Demi had extensive knowledge and experience with the Aslanti language and culture, the Varisian lodges of Magnamar and Riddleport put out a call to Demi for her assistance. The people of ancient Thassalon, whose ruins had long dotted the landscape of distant Varisia, had once shared much with Aslant, including the roots of their language. The Varisians needed people familiar with this, if they were ever going to figure out what was happening with these dreadful rune lords that kept popping up across their land. Diyanah's Epilogue. Diyanah approached Eutropia in the days following the coronation, saying that he would be stepping down as Grand Strategos of Taldor. Best to go out with a big win under his belt. Eutropia completely understood why, as Diyanah had never really liked taking credit for Rankle's successes. She did grant him the Senate seat he'd been looking for almost a year ago when she had met him for the first time at the Exaltation Day Gala, and he was happy with that. He would remain one of Eutropia's key advisors forever after. He also stayed close with Sepsinia, and the two of them continued to pull off various ruses together whenever they had the chance. Diyanah himself was not the only Frascati to gain some fame in Taldor. At the end of the War of the Crown, the only one of the Prefecture Grand Dukes to actually lose his life in the conflict was the Grand Duke of Diyanah's very own Sofra Prefecture, who had been killed in Pytherius' fortress in Zamar. With the death of Grand Duke Erginus Vobilar, Eutropia named a new Grand Duke to the high position of the Sofra Prefecture, none other than Diyanah's own brother Vespero. Finally, it is also true that at one point Diyanah and Aurelius travelled together, all the way to distant Tianxia, to visit their old friend Hao Jin. And yes, it's true that Diyanah did also serve as a guest judge for the next decennial Ruby Phoenix tournament, but that is a story for another day. Aurelius's Epilogue. Aurelius found himself the lord of not one but two keeps. The the Bettany estate of the Stakis barony in the Tandak prefecture, and the old Betanos keep of Tuscalia county in the Sofra prefecture. Over time, Aurelius would find more and more that he favoured the renovation and upkeep of his old southern lands, and he relinquished the Bettany estate, formally passing ownership of the whole estate to the Honourable Sheriff Honor Episcom of Stakis. Speaking of the old Betanos keep, Aurelius himself was shocked to discover that his father's spirit had not moved on, despite the fact that Aurelius had both killed Pytherius and released the spirit of Te Amelon. He couldn't understand why his father couldn't move on, and in a fraught discussion with him, his father told Aurelius that he feared he was still bound by the perceived dishonour that had come to the Betanos name. "But I've already brought greatness back to our name," shouted Aurelius at the ghost of his father in the tower. "I've fought demigods, and I've been named the custodian of the mantle of kings. I'm a chief advisor to the Grand Princess." But the ghost shrugged, and merely told Aurelius that all this was still not enough. So it was that Aurelius would continue to stay closely involved with matters of the throne, acting as an extension of the Grand Princess herself, in all matters great and small, as he continued to try to prove himself to the shade that even now endured in his West Tower. As his power as a wizard expanded, he also continued to stay in touch with Hao Jin, whom he continued to grow increasingly close with over the decades that followed. End of chapter. Thank you so much for watching. Can you believe it? We're done. This is it. This is the final episode of Pathfinder 616. I can't believe that we've gotten here. It's wild to me. Fear not. We have been playing a game of Bloodlords, and very soon that will end up here on the channel as well. We'll be kicking off my whole new volume of Pathfinder 616 in the very near future. But what a conclusion here to the War for the Crown series. We faced the final three emperors. That is, of course, Beldam the First. Another, this one not necessarily a skill challenge, kind of a puzzle. I do like puzzles. They solved it ultimately by making the right skill checks, but it is kind of a mechanical puzzle for the players to solve. Harkens back all the way to the kind of escape room style puzzle that we had back in book 1. Not so many of these in War for the Crown overall, but I do like it when they pop up. It's a bit of a different thing for the players to solve. And then Janaris III, who was a war general, and Stavian I, who famously initiated the pogroms against the Sarenites and banned the worship of Sarenrae. They are just pretty much straight fights, and that sequencing of the emperors ended up working really well for me, because each of the fights ended up being more difficult than the last. So Janaris was quite difficult, Stavian was even more difficult, and then of course after they defeat Stavian, in my version there's still one more fearsome foe to overcome, and that is what is left of Panavar Lothid that he inserted into Carrius. I spent a little bit of time thinking about how I was going to do that. Was I just going to bring Panavar back in full, the way that he was statted out? And I decided that would have been too repetitive. And also, the other thing that was kind of interesting is that the books do this really cool thing. At the beginning of each of the books, there's a piece of artwork, which maybe I'll render that series here. There's a piece of artwork that suggests little elements from the backstory of some of the central characters. So we see Martella being picked on by her brothers. We see Eutropia and Carrius as children. We see Carrius getting pushed out of a window. We see all these little moments, and in the final book we see a very young rendering of Panavar Lothid, and he's holding his little bird Zeno that died and inspired him to become an immortal wizard with only immortal friends. That picture is ultimately what inspired me to be like, okay, this sliver of Panavar in Carrius's mind, he renders like a child as well, and that the big bad is actually not going to be Carrius himself, but this sort of phantom incarnation of his little pet raven, who has become huge and is kind of a rock-sized creature with lightning and storm attacks. And that enormous kind of bird creature would be the final fight. After fighting Janaris and Stavian, they have to take on Zeno, writ large, I also always like that that Aurelius's familiar was actually made by Panavar, and that the thread of Panavar liking ravens or having a thing for ravens has always been there, and the players have never fully understood it until this moment that they get to see what Panavar went through as a child. It felt like I got to use some of the backstory provided in the adventure that doesn't really surface otherwise. I can't imagine that most playgroups know what motivated Panavar. So that was really cool, and ended up being a really fun finale. And then finally, at the end of all that, we sat around, we talked about the adventure that had passed, and we did little epilogues for each of the characters that you see rendered here. And then, of course, the other thing is that all of the adventures the players have shaped Princess Eutropia. Princess Eutropia, there are 4 different versions of her that are presented at the end of the book, depending on the actions the players took. And our Princess Eutropia ended up being Eutropia the Kind, who is known for her fairness and her deft diplomacy and her care for the little people of Taldor. She is, I think this is a version of Eutropia that's pretty consistent with the lore of 2nd edition as well, which is kind of cool. And it ended up being a really fun, really cool campaign. This is definitely one that if you have players that enjoy politics and like figuring out who are the different factions and how they can convince them to go a certain way. This is such a great adventure for that kind of role-playing, and it gets a big thumbs up from me, and I hope that we get some of that fun political action in my upcoming Bloodlords game as well, and I hope to see you all there in the near future. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.